Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Technology Executive Roundtable. I'm Danielle Pinto. I am the Senior Director of Member Success here at PACT, and I'd like to welcome you all to what I think is going to be a really interesting conversation this morning. Just first would like to send a big thank you to our sponsors of this Technology Executive Roundtable series. So Amatech, Boomi, Signity, Comcast Business, RSM, SEI, SAP, Slalom, and Vanguard. Just some quick house rules that I want to review before we get started. So please stay muted, ask plenty of chat window or in Q&A. There is the option to raise your hand, but we ask people to keep things to the Q&A. It is to the right of this little screen right here, and you'll see a chat tab and a Q&A tab. So the panel will go for about an hour. And then after, we'll link you back all into the remote event room where you can continue to network until about 10 a.m. So with that being said, I'll introduce our moderator for today. So Amy Loftus, who's a general manager with Slalom. Amy, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. And I will step aside and let you take it away.
Thanks, Danielle, and good morning to everyone that's joining us today. And thanks as well to the sponsors of the Roundtable. I am certainly excited for the topic today on augmented reality. I think as we look at technology applications, not just after COVID, even before, there's some acceleration in a post-COVID world. I think our panelists will offer some great insights today on how you might think about AR in your environment. We'll pull on some examples from healthcare, but also some interesting examples in the data and analytics world. And I know all of us are looking for new ways to use our data to get insights. So let's get going. I'm going to start by introducing our three panelists, and then we'll begin the conversation. First, we have Vivek Buch. Vivek completed his undergraduate and medical school training at Brown University, and then smartly came to the University of Pennsylvania to do his neurosurgery training. He is now a clinical instructor of neurosurgery at Stanford, and he's going to talk about the pipelines he's developing for AR and the use of it during live surgery for intraoperative visualization, navigation, and guidance. He's also working on strategies to use AR in a clinic-based patient education setting to improve access to information. Welcome, Vivek.
Thanks, Amy.
Please also join me in welcoming Chris Franci. Chris received his bachelor's in biochemistry from Penn State, go Nittany Lions, and a PhD in pharmacology from Case Western Reserve. He joined AdMed based on his passion for teaching science and making it accessible to others. As president and scientific director, Chris has been involved in several pharmaceutical sales training application projects focused on the largest brands in the world, specifically using AR projects to bring that patient story to life and allow them to navigate 3D models of the lungs and the brain. Good morning, Chris.
Thanks, Amy. Happy to be here.
And please join me too in welcoming Patrick Callahan. Patrick is the founding partner of Compass Red. Compass Red is a data and analytics agency originally founded in San Francisco, now headquartered in Wilmington. And as part of the CARES grant and in partnership with IDEO and others, Compass Red has established a nonprofit data innovation lab modeled off the MIT Media Labs. Its purpose is to explore innovative uses of data and its effects of COVID on the region. And they are using AR to reduce time to insight in a collaborative environment. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you so much.
Nice to have you all here. So let's start our conversation, and I'd love to hear from each of you. We gave a little bit of a teaser around how you're using AR in your respective environments. Vivek, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure.
The use of AR in surgery. How did you get started? Where are you using it today? And maybe share a little bit more about what you're seeing in terms of adoption not just in neurosurgery, but perhaps in other surgery use cases.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy, and thank you for this opportunity to be here, and thank you to the other panelists, Chris and Patrick as well. I think from our standpoint, I think the use of augmented reality in a surgical setting is actually kind of a sort of a logical next step in terms of the progression of surgical technology over the past, I would say probably decade or two, really. And the reason for that is that we've always been trying to create ways of visualizing what we are doing better. We started a long time ago with these little light boxes and the X-rays, and you can barely see anything, and somehow we use those to make educated decisions about what to do in an operative setting. But we've come a long way with CAT scan and then MRI, and recently we've been able to incorporate the concept of navigation, which is really that we can take a patient's imaging from before the operation, whether it be a CAT scan or an MRI, and then when we're in the operating room itself, we can use these special optical camera tracking systems to give us a sense of where we are during the surgery with respect to that MRI or that CAT scan. But all of that is in 2 dimensions still. And all the imaging that we get as surgeons is it's in 2 dimensions. It's all the information that we receive, and we're sort of tasked during the operation and before the operation to kind of put all of those 2D images together in our minds into kind of a 3D map of what we anticipate we're going to see, and we kind of use that map to sort of guide us when we make our own decisions in the operating room. But the question always comes down to the fact that, is there a reason that we can't just look at all of this information in 3D? The sort of the source code is there. The data that's produced by the imaging, it's you can reconstruct it in 3 dimensions. So it's a visualization question. And the advent of these kind of augmented reality headsets is really what kind of prompted us to start thinking about this question very carefully. We sort of felt that with the right kind of pipeline of software, you can take an image that we get in the operating room itself from like a little portable CAT scanner for instance, for spine surgery, which is where I started using this. And you can take that portable CAT scan that you get in the operating room, and then with a series of steps, create kind of a patient-specific hologram out of that CAT scan. And then sort of using kind of innovative tools within various open source platforms, we were able to create a pipeline that could take that CAT scan, create a hologram, and then put it back on the patient's body in sort of a real kind of anatomical alignment. That was sort of just proof of concept, and we're working now towards developing ways to use that to actually help guide the surgery. And you can imagine our whole goal with this is to try and create more and more precise surgical applications. And like you said, not just in spine or neurosurgery, but this could really be throughout the body. And we know that minimally invasive surgery has better outcomes in terms of recovery times, and if you're not sacrificing the actual outcome of the surgery itself, then there's a lot of evidence to support the fact that trying to go more and more precise, less and less invasive, is absolutely the direction of the future for surgery. And I think this is one of the elements that's going to get us there.
Vivek, that's awesome. And you're kind of coming at it from being in that operating room setting, and what you as an MD and a surgeon need to support it. I'm going to come back to you on adoption and what it will take to get more of the applications adopted in that setting. But I'm going to go over to Chris on the patient side and the teaching side. I'd love to hear, Chris, maybe share just more about AdMed, your mission, how you're using AR, and where you really see its place in educating patients and educating physicians in the future.
Right. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Vivek. It's really interesting because I see parallels from my graduate school training in pharmacology and seeing, at Case Western, a lot of the med students utilizing some of this AR technology to look at anatomy, to learn. And at AdMed, we're teachers of science, right? We want to break down the walls of complex science and open it up to anyone to understand. And I think AR is one of those tools that can help us do that. So we work with a lot of pharmaceutical companies to train their sales reps, their nurse navigators, their people about the diseases that they work on, the drugs that treat them, so they can better communicate that. And we also do more of a nonprofit side, just for any, general medical education. We have a lot of things going on right now with COVID-19 and other health crisis, things people want to know about. So that was really, when I came to AdMed, I was really happy because I loved teaching science, and we've been able to do that. And we started with looking at augmented reality about 2 to 3 years ago and thinking, how can we help it simplify science, use this tool? And we started doing more kind of company events, team events, maybe at conference centers. And so, a company would want to train on maybe the culture. And so they could use their phones or their iPads, which are devices pretty much everyone has now. And they could go around and there'd be certain triggers in a room that would then, make an image, a 3D image would pop up with animation, and there'd be some interactivity built in. And then we also did a medical-based session where a patient story would come up, and you would see the patient. You maybe go in to look at, in this case, it had to do with cancer. So you'd see their cancer, maybe what tissues it had invaded in 3 dimensions or 2 dimensions. And then the users would be in a team and they'd have to answer a question, to kind of push the interactivity too. So we had a lot of success with that. It was really fun. But then, of course, COVID hit and there's no more group sessions, right? So everything changed. And then, we thought a little differently. And the beauty of AR and this technology is you can also use it on your own physically. You don't have to be around others. So again, we can use the phone, the iPad, and we wanted some of our customers to learn more about the physiology of the lungs or of the brain due to the disease states they were studying. So we created 3D models from our medical illustrators. We were able to put that into this AR platform, and the user can move around with their device. They can go into the different layers, into the different bronchi of the lungs. They can look at the alveoli. They can zoom in or out as much as they want to explore these different structures. And it gives you a little bit more than just maybe a 2D image that you see in a textbook, right? And as Vivek is saying, these are 3-dimensional problems, 3-dimensional structures. They're not 2-dimensional. So how do we get to actually seeing it more in 3-dimensional real space? So we did that, and people were really excited about that. But there's always more to do, right? So I think the next step is, can we push this technology further? And Patrick will probably talk about that, but can you kind of get people into rooms together virtually to maybe look at the mechanism of action of their drug? How are these immune cells attacking this cancer cell? How are they initiating apoptosis? You can move around it. You could move things around and then discuss virtually. So that was kind of our next step that we wanted to do. And it's just been really exciting so far.
Thanks, Chris. I can imagine, I think just thinking about some of your clients and having very large sales organizations that are trying to go in to educate on new products and launch them in this world, that this is an amazing application if you can think about accessing that education on an iPad or on your iPhone.
Exactly.
Thanks for that. We're already getting some questions in the chat, so I'm going to come back to that, but I want Patrick to share a little bit more about what he's doing, because oftentimes I think we maybe don't think about AR in data visualization, and you have some interesting use cases for how you're applying that. So Patrick, you want to share more about that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy, and thank you, Slalom, for sponsoring this. Vivek and Chris, as I listen to you, I have my daughter in med school in Philadelphia, and this is her first year, and she's going through this during COVID. And we got talking about her. If you can imagine, anatomy is not necessarily the same virtually, and so there's a lot of different universities in the med school unit that are actually going using anatomy using AR, VR, and mixed reality type things that are having an impact. In fact, a school out in California is completely going all VR in their anatomy classes, so they don't have to use the cadaver. It's all virtual. I'll be interested to see how that plays out, and I'm very interested in that area. For us at Compass Red and the Data Lab here in Delaware, our focus is how do we get, the problem we're trying to solve is how do you get to insight faster? So if you're looking at a data set, if you imagine you're looking, and if you're bringing up business intelligence or anything like that, you're using two-dimensional models. And just like the analogy Vivek uses and Chris uses about how do they surgically see things that they haven't seen before, or how do they reduce the time of the surgery, and using AR and VR to do that, we like to do the same thing with data. So when we're doing the research on data sets, two pieces to that is there are things that we can't see in a different dimension. So can we pull the data out? Can we overlay maps? Can we do those type of things in a different dimension? And the history of development over my career has always been you go to from spreadsheets to graphs and spreadsheets to business intelligence to three-dimensional business intelligence. And then now this is the next phase of really working with the data, almost like Mission Impossible style, where you're grabbing the data and you're pulling it in quickly. A second part of that is to get to the insight faster. A lot of times you need that subject matter expert with you. So Vivek, when he's doing surgery, he's got the subject matter expert in his head. There's the expert right there, and he's working with the people right there. But a lot of times when you're working with complex data sets, you need to have the subject matter expert by your side as the data scientist or the data analyst is working through this stuff. And so being able to collaborate and have multiple people in the room in an AR, again, augmented reality versus a virtual reality, really changes the scenario quite a bit. And you can get to that insight, because again, the goal is get to insight faster and then find things you may not have been able to see before. With the data lab, what we're doing is we're demonstrating some of those things by bringing in COVID data sets and overlaying it in our environment or in the city of Wilmington, and saying what areas are actually growing with COVID cases. And when you see that difference through an augmented reality or virtual reality environment, you can see things like, oh, that's why that area is growing, that you wouldn't have been able to just see on a spreadsheet or anywhere else. And then when you could potentially have the governor, the head of our DHS system, and the head of our hospital system, Christiana Care, in the same room virtually, and with a data scientist by their side and walking through these things, the clarity as to why something has happened happens instantaneously. So that's some of the things we're working on, and we're super excited again about getting AR, VR, and mixed reality into the environment of data.
That's great, Patrick, and I think so much. I know for our participants, I mean, we have chief data officers, we have VPs of data and analytics, and all of us use data to inform what we're doing today. So more to talk about there. We're going to come back. I guess I'd ask each of you just about adoption. And Vivek, I'll start with you. I mean, you talked about this being kind of a pilot, a proofing, Stanford known for a lot of innovation. Where do you see this in terms of its applicability across the surgery domain? Chris mentioned, and Patrick in teaching. I guess share more about, is it really small scale at this point, and what do you see as needing to happen to get to a larger scale?
Yes, I think that's it's sort of an excellent kind of $1 million question. There is, how do you start using it? In surgery, one of the nice things for us is that we are very used to wearing something on our head. And typically they're glasses, they're loupes, or sort of magnification glasses. But, there's no reason that you couldn't sort of substitute the use of loupe magnifiers with a headset. If a headset offers the ability to create magnification at the same time as offering the ability to use mixed reality overlays, then this is it's a paradigm shift a little bit in terms of what surgeons would be using, but it's not that far off from what surgeons are used to. So I think that adoptability is actually inherently present in this type of technology, just based on that fact. And the things that we're going to need to get there, though, I will say, in sort of these early development pipelines, there is a problem with what we call in this space, we call it jitter, but it's a problem with fixation of the mixed reality overlay or the 3D model, the hologram, whatever you call it in your specific setting. And the reason that's it's probably not noticeable as much when you are using it for data analytics and educational concepts, because you're walking around it, you're kind of looking at different elements, and as it moves, while you move, you can kind of adjust to that. But the concept of jitter is that when you look at the 3D reconstruction from one angle, it is slightly different than when you look at it from another angle in space. And that's something to do with the cameras. There's multiple cameras that are on the AR headsets, and the frame rates of the cameras are what's allowing the ability to see these kind of different dimensions in your view. And there's an inherent problem with the ability to fixate, when the whole point is that you need cameras that are kind of jumbling the image a little bit so that you get a depth out of what you're seeing. And so, when in our kind of proof of concept work, we found that to be a primary concern. Was when I look at it from one angle, the registration looks like it is matched up to the patient's anatomy. When I change my angle, it might look a little bit different. And so, there are workarounds that we're actively developing for that, which incorporates computer vision actually to constantly use some landmarks on the surgical field to continuously kind of in the background reorient your image every time, and automatically, so that when you move, the image will move with your new vantage point. But I think that's going to be something that I know, for instance, from a hardware standpoint, there are ways to build it better. And Microsoft in particular, I know, has been working on that with the HoloLens 2. And we're starting to do the testing of these types of pipelines with the HoloLens 2. Early reports seem to be that it is better. But that's going to be a key factor for adoption in the surgical domain is being able to trust that what you are looking at is in fact the accurate representation of the actual anatomy. I think that's going to be the next step.
That's great. Yeah, I can imagine, Vivek, that a surgeon used to his or her craft certainly doesn't want to be second guessing in that surgical suite. They want to you want to have confidence. Thanks for that. Chris, I guess as you think about, you have supported some of the largest brands in the world who've had large promotion budgets. Mm-hmm. What about the applicability now, post-COVID, in some of this education? Do you see acceleration and adoption of this coming a little bit more rapidly? And what do you think it will take to adopt these technologies, either in the pharmaceutical setting or in other settings?
Right. Well, in the pharmaceutical setting, and it's probably similar to other industries as well, it's very highly regulated. So it's not always easy to break in with something new, especially right away. So I think, just talking to our customers, you don't want to just bring them a new shiny tool or a new gadget unless you can really prove to them that, hey, it's going to help me somehow. It's going to help my sales force. It's going to help, education of my team. So, we've been trying to get those measurements and to show that proof, because I think, that's important for any industry and how you roll it out. And, we're trying to get those measurements when you're looking at these visuals, like we were talking about, in 3 dimensions, can they better explain to the physician why this is going to be beneficial to the patient? Because this mechanism is different. It's going at the root source of the disease. Better being able to explain that confidently. And I think they are a little more expensive. I know we'll probably get to that, but as the technology gets better and better, that cost isn't become as much of a factor. So I think as the tech side gets better, we're more on the application side, but that keeps improving with the computer scientists, the physicists, all the really smart guys kind of keep that pushing. That's going to help us and everybody else. And the other thing, Vivek, you were talking about with the headsets, we found that not everybody likes those. You can have very different audiences, different ages, and kind of different comfortability with certain technology. So not everyone likes the headsets. So they like having the ability to just use a tablet or a phone too, because they're still in their surroundings, and it's just augmenting. And on the table in front of you, you can see your image through the device. So we found it's easier to kind of do that. And I think that's maybe a big reason why augmented reality is accelerating quicker than virtual reality, at least in our industry.
Yeah, I think that's good. If I can chime in, I think that's a great point. That is 100%, 100% true for the sort of the patient interface side,
Right.
even from what we're hoping to be able to do with this technology. And I think that type of a platform immediately offers, a factor of 10 or 100, in terms of the scale for what this could be used for.
Yeah, and Chris, I've had the great fortune to see some of AdMed's technology, and I know one of the things that I've thought about is even when you think about some of the challenges for patients really understanding diagnosis and treatment plan and the whys behind it to get to a good outcome, is that we know that not everybody is a learner that comes from just hearing, but they also need to see. And I think bringing that to life may even drive compliance in ways that we haven't seen in the past. So that's exciting too.
Yeah, that's a great
Especially if we can reduce cost of care and really get to a great outcome.
Right. And Vivek, you know that you have a busy schedule. The physicians are very busy. So being able to have another tool to help them explain something to a patient when they're just in the waiting room can be huge.
Absolutely. And have it be consistent, not based necessarily on who may be doing it.
Right.
Patrick, talk more about, how you even brought this idea around visualization in a different way to data. And I guess I'd love to hear a little bit of, I think many people are saying they're on their road to better insights. And part of that is visualization tools. And part of that is getting their data in one place, consistency, availability. And now this appears to be the next frontier. How did you get all of that set up? Was there a basis of data that you worked from? What type of talent did it take to start to bring this to life?
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you. It actually came out of the healthcare area. And so we have Christiana Care here as one of the larger hospital systems here, and they're very good at innovations with these type of things and then putting them to practical use. And one of the doctors is like, we've got to figure out a way that we can collaborate using these type of things. And so that was the big push. He was also looking at what Chris was, your business is based off of. Like, how can I train up nurses faster and faster at these type of things without the cost that normally it would take? So we spent a lot of time figuring that piece out, but it's been iterations of discussions. And as far as like where the actual sources of talent have come from actually trying to figure this out, the gaming world is one of the bigger areas that we're actually finding, hiring them, getting them integrated into the data science and data analytics, and this is what data looks like, and having them, develop it from that side of thing was, that's where the talent's coming from. I think, just as Vivek and Chris said, the biggest things that we're having, that are not the adoption portion of it, these things still, they cost $3,000, as a piece. They're finicky. they're focused, on high margin type project or surgeries, that type of thing. You can't just use it for a small surgery. And then just the wider adoption of larger application. When we start to see Microsoft Excel running on the HoloLens a little bit easier, maybe that'll start to encourage the adoption of things on top of it.
Got it. That makes sense. I want to go over to the Q&A, and Tom Morgan may think that I've been ignoring him over here, but I haven't. He's asking about if any of you are aware of use cases being developed for mental health, especially around treatment or other support for younger people. And he references this increase in mental health conditions and self-harm between 13 and 18-year-olds. Chris, Vivek, either of you have any thoughts on that around treatment and care?
I can start by saying I think this is Tom, that's an excellent thought, and I think you're absolutely right that the age group in particular is kind of ripe for accepting this as a technology. In my personal practice, I have not seen it for mental health, but I think that there are numerous ways that I can imagine this being extremely helpful, and one of them just being from a therapy standpoint, not having to physically go and see a therapist. If you can use the platforms that Chris and Patrick are building, that the ability to have access to mental health care without having to physically go somewhere else, I think could be an enormous advantage to these young people that maybe that's all it takes is in those few moments of wanting to hurt themselves, if they just have somebody that they could reach out to in that same environment that they could talk to, that it might make an enormous impact on their outlook and their actions. So I think it's a wonderful idea. I have not personally seen it, but I'd be happy to connect with some people at Stanford to see if this is something that they'd be interested in.
Chris, any thoughts on this as you think about just teaching and patient education, even going beyond into this treatment plan?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. And I think we've all read the statistics, right? The isolation with COVID certainly has a psychological impact, especially in that younger age group. So we do work with companies who work on major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, and these are really, they're interesting diseases that are difficult to understand because you're talking about the brain, right, which is so complex, and there's so much to learn, that so much we don't understand about it. So that we have done training in this area, exploring. We have an AR model in the brain, kind of looking at some of the neurons, how are they firing, how are they working. But the mechanisms of some of these depressions are still not really well understood. So I think we're kind of a little bit removed from understanding that. But I think kind of what Vivek was saying, a lot of the treatment is psychotherapy. So you're talking to a psychologist or a professional. A lot of that can really be helpful. So usually if you could, I know that there's a lot of this telemedicine now. So that's being used, and maybe using AR to help make that even better.
Yes.
Right. I know there's companies that we've worked next to that are really focused on mental health. That's all they do. And they have, focus on it with soldiers with PTSD and really anybody. So there's companies that are doing this now. I'd be curious to see what the adoption is of AR. But I think we'll have to stay tuned.
Patrick, Chris, you mentioned adoption, and Patrick, you hit on this, and so did Vivek, on this cost element, and just cost of a headset, and potentially even the cost of talent to really start to build out some models I guess, how are you, when you think about a use case or stepping into this, what are some real costs that this audience needs to think about if they were to go into a pilot, and where might they find the talent to help them even get started?
Sure. So just real quick on Tom's question too, just the virtual reality space is exploding with that mental health help. And I know it's different from AR, but they actually, they're headsets on your head and they distort your vision. And so I think in a good way. And so that's one area that I know is really taking off that will transfer over to AR. Amy, on your question with what are driving the cost down, or what things that actually are, again, widespread, it's just like the fax machine that I'll continue to go back to. It's like as more of them get created and more technology gets in there, the cheaper it'll become. And I think this is something we see Apple starting to do. Their virtual reality headsets. Again, I know that's not augmented reality, but they're very close in the same use cases. Some of the costs that we see that people don't really anticipate, and I'd be curious if Chris and Vivek's hearing around this, is security in a hospital system. If your headsets are on an open network, you have all kinds of HIPAA concerns. And I know that sometimes even hospital systems are standing up their own networks that are just focused strictly on that, so that for a lot of different reasons, that's certainly a piece there. There's universities here, and I know Temple and Drexel are really deep into this. And so same thing at the University of Delaware, are getting into the AR, VR, and having majors or even degrees focused strictly on this. And so I kind of see them as like developing the next wave of, and again, they're probably using it in gaming environments more readily, but that definitely translates into what skills we need to build this out in the future. So I think the university systems, especially in the Philadelphia regions, are doing a great job at training students in on this.
Chris, I know I've had the fortune to see a little bit of your team in action as you're getting these together. Do you want to share? I mean, when you're starting to create this, because I think you're creating it in a super accessible way on iPads and iPhones, how's this coming together as you create some of these models for consumption in a learning environment? Right. What does a team look like? Where have you found those skills and talent in Philadelphia?
Right. Yeah, so we have in-house, the medical expertise. We have the creative people who we do a lot of videos, so they're making the medical illustrations. We have animators who are animating it. So we have a lot of talent. So we're trying to think, how much is it going to cost to start using AR? Because we don't have the tech people right now, all of them in-house to do AR. So what we were able to do is utilize a lot of our visuals and images that we already have, either in 2D or 3D. And then we worked with a partner, in Philadelphia, who could help, who has some of the technical expertise to help us bring that to life. And then as far as the headsets, like Patrick and Vivek were talking about, we don't always have to use them, right? So we can have the phone or the iPad, so that you don't have to buy the headset for that AR use case. And then if we wanted to go more into the virtual reality, there's cheaper headsets, the Oculus Go, that are, I think, $200, and we were able to do those. And so they all have pluses and minuses. But I think for us, you can't do it all on your own. So you use what you do best, and then find somebody to help you kind of bring that into the AR space. That was our approach.
And Vivek, how did you, Stanford, people are probably thinking, wow, there's a lot of resources there to bring this together. What did your team look like to bring a use case forward in the surgical setting? And kind of, when is it ready for prime time and something like that too?
Yeah, I think, a lot of this work, I started when I was in residency at Penn, and, the team was, essentially it just so happens that I myself, I have sort of a computational neural engineering background. And there was another resident at the time who's actually now also on the West Coast in Seattle, but he was a radiology, IR, interventional radiology resident. And he was a software engineer before coming to medicine. And so the two of us had kind of gotten together early on, and we started talking about the use of AR in both in interventional radiology as well as in the operating room. And so we kind of started developing the platform ourselves with respect to the various kind of open source pieces that kind of individually do various components of what we needed to do to create this finalized product. But really it came down to incorporating the kind of the CS department, and in particular, just like Chris and Patrick have alluded to, the gaming field. And there were senior projects and graduate student projects in the CS department at Penn that were students were trying to create games for the HoloLens very, very early on. And it was those students and those teams that we also kind of partnered with to help sort of optimize and just kind of streamline that process to be able to use this in the operating room itself. And at Stanford, there's a huge just a much easier technology adoption mentality, I think, in general. And so Stanford has a lot of resources from the engineering side that are also similar in that way, but perhaps a scale larger. And it really just comes down to being able to, just as Chris and Patrick again have alluded to, is your own strengths. You have a vision perhaps of how this can be used. A lot of the engineering and the sort of the technology experts themselves don't really have the understanding of these particular applications. And so it really takes the combination of people that can understand the vision, understand how this can be used, and then the people that can help you kind of create that from the building blocks.
Great, thanks, Vivek. I see a comment from Ken Weirman. Good morning, Ken. Talking about the use of cell phones and iPads for remote service, and that being a vehicle to kind of step into this and maybe take that barrier of the headset out of the way, which Chris, I know that for sure you've done. So I guess we've talked about kind of getting this going and some real use cases. How about obstacles? I mean, what's gotten in your way, and what advice do you have for these leaders this morning as to how to break through some of those barriers, maybe beyond the cost of the physical headset? What other barriers are out there for these technology and business leaders that they should be looking out for?
Just real quick, I'll mention that this follows again the analogy of there's two things actually. It follows the analogy of the fax machine, right? If you've got another fax machine, it's Metcalfe's law. It's like if you have the fax machine on the other side of things to receive it, then that's great. So I think as more and more people get these into their hands, we'll start to see a greater adoption, mainstream applications starting to. So that to me is the biggest right now, and just even the awareness of it. The hardware is still a little bit finicky. So when people put this on their head, with being finicky kind of puts a little barrier. I can't use that. But Amy, I think you and I started, in our years at Anderson when they started out with the day in the life of Claire, just the case studies that help people picture the power of these things. If we could get those out there even more, I think people will start to see, okay, actually this does have an impact.
Yeah, I think there's some great examples now, even in a retail or if somebody works in the design field and they talk about this idea that you could simulate the feel and look of assessing a package on a shelf, knowing that so much of that is what attracts us to buy something. And if you're not actually physically in the store, like your ability to be able to see and experience that, like I'm going to take that versus this, and bringing that into the design field is something that's there and that's coming. So it's out there for everything. Joan, I see, has put something into the Q&A. Thoughts on how AR could be used to make an impact on opioid avoidance. How it's changing the brain makeup, some of the education, maybe even how to educate those that may be more susceptible based upon brain chemistry or other things. Chris, you're nodding, and Vivek, you are too.
Yeah.
I guess I could go first. So we've worked on this at AdMed to, opioid abuse is a huge problem in the U.S., really worldwide, especially in the U.S. and in Philadelphia, even right here where we are. And I think that one thing we're trying to do is get better education out there. And so we started actually, what are the audiences? And one you were talking about, Amy, with brain chemistry is the younger generation. If the younger generation does somehow get introduced to opioids and start abusing them, the incidence of them becoming addicted goes up astronomically. And part of that's brain chemistry, because the part of the brain involved in decision making isn't fully developed until you're about 25 years old. And so you're going to make a little bit more quick decisions, and that could lead to abuse of drugs and especially opioids. And so we wanted to create, a video atmosphere, short videos, like a chat feature that younger people would want to interact with. So as they start to use things like Pokemon Go, which is an AR app on the phone, get comfortable with it. If they start looking at other educational tools that are similar to that, they might, start using that more, and it could help them and make a big impact. So I think definitely for the younger generation, that kind of links to that previous question, that could make a huge impact, and we could see that grow.
And I think to add to that, I think and sort of an analogous disease state that I find used to have a huge problem and is getting a lot better now is smoking. And I think a reason for that is sort of a direct representation of what happens when you smoke. We've all seen the black lungs and the pictures of the black lungs, etc. It's harder to do with an addiction problem, but there are ways that you can kind of similarly make these kind of connections for people that gives them a sort of a sense of what it might be like, both biologically in the brain with addiction, neurochemically, but also, if you can use AR to kind of give a sense of what somebody with an opioid addiction might see on a day-to-day basis. What would their world look like? And you can imagine that it's, everything is it's dimmer, it's slower, you're not responding as quickly. If you can give people that sense of, this is what my life might look like if I continue down this road, just as when you see a smoker that's talking through a tracheostomy with the passenger valve and, saying this is what smoking has done to me, because they can only talk when they put their hand over the tracheostomy, that those are images that are very powerful. And I think, being able to use AR is a way, and VR is a way to kind of create those types of images for these types of problems.
Thanks, Vivek. That's a great example. And just, putting it in a totally different context. I love this idea of put yourself into that situation. It feels like almost, all of you have talked about just how this could be so powerful in an education setting. I think for everyone on the phone, we're onboarding employees in a remote world right now. What would it be like to be part of this organization? What would it be like to experience learning in a different way? Apparently I need to move around more so my lights come on. So more to be said there. I guess we have a little bit of time left. I want to ask each of you, what's your advice for these leaders in getting started? Where do you recommend they start? And they come from different fields, not just healthcare. How could they step into it? We have people in manufacturing and financial services and for sure healthcare, pure technology companies. Maybe I'll ask each of you, what's a piece of advice for for how to get started if they don't have this as part of their technology suite right now?
I'll take a shot at it first. I think the biggest thing, like most people don't even know what this is, especially some of the our team colleagues, whatever. And I think making it simple and easy for them to play with, even as the starting of a game, but very simple use cases that get them used to the gestures, or as Ken said, using just very, very simple things to expose them to that could be extremely helpful.
Great.
I would say, whenever you're using a new technology, whether it's, AR or VR or even artificial intelligence is being thrown around, you need to start with the problem, right? And if you start with the problem, like we're struggling to do this or struggling to do that, no matter what the industry, then if you kind of diagnose it right and think about, okay, what's a possible solution? Is AR a possible way to solve this? To be able to teach my employees how to do this, or to educate them better without having someone there with them? Or, maybe it's not. But I think you have to start with the problem, and all the best people I've talked to who are really smart about how to use these, that's what they say. Let's start with the problem, let's break it down and see if it's right. It may be, it may not be. But I think that's probably the best advice I can give to everybody.
Vivek, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would echo that completely. I think from our standpoint as well, it was, we started with the problem of visualization and the whole concept that it's, we're creating 3D anatomical models in our own head to guide our surgery. And why couldn't we just visualize that and see that, in real anatomical space? So I agree completely with both Patrick and Chris. And I think I laughed when Patrick was talking about the gestures, because when I started using this in the operating room, there were actually a lot of people that when they would walk by the operating room itself, and they're not in the room, so they don't know what I'm doing, but they're looking in and they can see through the window, and here I am, like, I look like I just have, out in La La Land here with my hands kind of floating in space and grabbing things and stuff. But I was working on the patient hologram, and I was bringing it over to the OR table. But there is a definite, particularly on the headset side, there is a definite learning curve to how to use that appropriately and just getting used to it. So I think I echo absolutely what Patrick and Chris said.
Something I could add to that too, you don't have to be an expert in this technology, right? I mean, I certainly wasn't. And you don't want that to be a barrier. You don't want to be intimidated by that. So I think if you really find that it can help you, you can find the right help and you can drive it to be a solution. So it's always hard with these new things to, that might be a lot of time, and it is going to take some time, but you don't want to be too intimidated by it, because you could really make a breakthrough.
And what I'm hearing, Chris, is we all need to hire a few gamers. I might have two in my house for grabs. So Vivek, one last question I see from Mo in the Q&A, and he references the use of recording a surgery live and then enabling others with that recording to train and practice. What are your thoughts? I mean, is that something you're thinking about or even doing?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think right now we do have this kind of concept in the VR space primarily. But the problem with VR, as you alluded to there, is that it's not really a live surgery. It's VR is primarily using more kind of cartoon schematics, and I mean they can look quite realistic overall, but they're still cartoon schematics primarily is the way that it's being used right now. So I think being able to incorporate a live surgery itself and kind of immersing yourself in that along with the surgeon that's doing it, I think is absolutely the wave that this technology is going in from a training side. And I will also mention that that we're kind of working on being able to incorporate during live surgery, not a recorded version of it, but during live surgery, having other surgeons that are able to view in with you. And this is particularly something that I think could be very important for global surgery. A lot of times, especially in areas where some of my colleagues have worked extensively on the global surgery side, which is in Africa, certainly not limited to Africa, but this is sort of where our most extensive experience is. But you have centers that do some specialized surgical techniques, and it can take, it can be 1,000 miles for a patient to get to that center from their village, and it could take their entire village's collective savings to get a patient there. We've seen that. And the whole point would be that, is that really necessary? If you can have surgeons that are trained to do these particular techniques, and then go out into these into their home sort of rural areas, and as they do the techniques, they have the mentor that's kind of there with them in a mixed reality fashion, using these headsets and immersive technologies. You might be able to have, not only in a training realm, but also in an actual patient care realm, this technology be used to help just make patients' lives better, easier, safer, and improve their outcomes. So I think that's absolutely the next step for this.
What a great example. And on that note, Vivek, I just want to say thanks to Chris and to Patrick and to Vivek for sharing what they're up to today and inspiring all of us really to think about this next tool in our technology toolkit and how we might use it in each of our settings, or even take a start, as was referenced in the Q&A, in the world of this usage, not just with a headset, but potentially on an iPad on your phone. So really appreciate you sharing more. I know that our panelists will be here for networking. So if you have some questions for them, I hope you'll stick around, and let me now turn it back to Danielle.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for participating. This was such an interesting conversation, and I'm really excited to learn more and dig a little bit deeper myself, just on all of the work you all are doing. So, as Amy said, we'll be in Remo for another about 25 minutes or so. We'll leave the room open until 10. So please follow up, go meet our panelists, talk with each other, work the room. I know we all miss being in a room together, but this is close. So thanks again to our sponsors for the Technology Executive Roundtable: Amatec, Boomi, Signity, Comcast Business, RSM, SEI, SAP, Slalom, and Vanguard. Really appreciate everybody's support and engagement now that we're coming into 1 year of this sort of virtual event reality that we're all living in. So please follow up with me, follow up with the PAC team if you have any questions about future programming, but come and say hi, stop and see us in a table in the room that we are going back to now. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.